Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what are the 5 biggest shifts student loan borrowers could experience in 2025? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, now that this new year is upon us, what are some possible big shifts that student loan borrowers will see in 2025? To comment on this is Prudent Money contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo, who is here to give us his thoughts. John, welcome to 2025.
Happy New Year to you, Bob. Great to be with you this afternoon.
You know, it's unbelievable it's 2025. It just seems like 2024, you started off in January, a blink, it was gone. But, it is the time to set goals. Are you a goal setter? I mean, how do you go about that on the beginning of the year? Or do you do anything at all?
Yeah. No, I do. And there was a startling revelation for me, Bob. This is like not all that out there, but it was. Somebody said to me during the holidays, we're about to enter the second quarter of the century. And it really kind of stunned me. I was like, yeah, that's right. Where did those first 25 years go? But to your point, we're in the second quarter of this century, but we're also in 2025, the start of the new year. And I think setting goals is really important. One of my personal goals was to try not to be negative about what the government is doing for student loan borrowers. So we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, that's well, I'll tell you how long it will last. Have you heard of Quitters Day?
No. What is Quitters Day?
Quitters Day, and it's only on the second Friday in January, so that would be January 10th, when most people who made New Year's resolutions quit them.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm hoping I can get through the second 5 minutes of this show before quitting on my New Year's resolution, but we'll see how we go.
I was thinking 10 days. That's not very long time. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about student loans, beginning of the year, and 2025. It seems like when you shift to a new year, you shift to new things that you really got to consider and think about. There's a lot of things that still are unresolved when it comes to student loan debt, and it's a very real situation for borrowers. And we could see some dramatic shifts in student loan debt this year. The problem is, John, no one knows, are these shifts a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Bob. And the way you set this conversation up reminded me of the great Yankee and New York Met to a certain extent, Yogi Berra. I don't know if you all in Texas followed Yogi the way we did in New York, but one of the things he liked to say, he had all these yogiisms around, but one of them was, "It's deja vu all over again." And he was talking about his teammates, Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, who used to hit back-to-back home runs all the time. They did it like 10 times in their career, which is pretty extraordinary. And so one day Yogi said, yeah, it's deja vu all over again. And I think about that with student loan borrowers because it is deja vu all over again from the perspective that there's a promise that there'll be some change. Then there's a long period where it gets dragged out, and now it's dragged out and in the courts. And then there seems to be a resolution, and then it either gets resolved or it gets kicked down the road a little bit further. So here we are in 2025, and you and I are going to talk about basically the same issues for the next month or two, hopefully not much more than that, as all this is trying to get settled. So I think you set this up the right way. I'd like to be hopeful that there's some change in the air, but I think it's unknown which way it's going to break.
Well, think about what student loan borrowers have been through. I mean, billions of dollars in forgiveness proposals for students. Some are from deceptive practices, which, Yeah, I'm glad to see that get resolved. I think that's a good thing. And then, of course, you've got this generalized student loan debt. And one of the things that kind of dawned on me as I was thinking about this today is that people are depending on the government and basically waiting for them to make the move. They're counting on it. For those who are waiting, what advice would you give? Because nothing is for sure. Nothing is certain. It's probably less certain at this point now that really the champion of student loan forgiveness, which would be Joe Biden, is on his way out the door. So what do you think? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think that's right. In fact, President Biden, just the December 20th, so Merry Christmas to 55,000 public servants who got the last of what is likely the forgiveness programs, about $4.28 billion. So the president forgave $180 billion worth of student loans for some 5 million students during the course of his presidency. And a good part of that was over the last 2 years. And one of the problems that I've had, and I've said this all along, and I think we got to the second 5 minutes, and I'll break my New Year's resolution now, is that the reality is that the politicians have been going for the sound bites rather than to real fixes to the student loan problem. So the reason that many borrowers, maybe another 4 or 5 million of them, are really hung up right now is that on the campaign trail back in May of 2023, when President Biden was still a candidate, he said that he was going to forgive this new program called the Saving for a Valuable Education, and they're going to cut basically the payments in half. That was in May of 2023. In the end of June, 2 states filed injunctions against that, saying you can't do that. You don't have the authority. And in August in 2023, the Supreme Court agreed with that and said, we're going to leave these injunctions in place, meaning that you can't implement this program, but you can enroll people in it, is kind of what has happened. So you have people enrolling in a program that is in front of the Supreme Court, and then we have an election, and we're going to have a change of administration, and it's really unclear where the Republican Congress and administration will come down on this. But it's pretty safe to say that based on their prior actions, they're not going to be real gung-ho about this SAVE program. So borrowers who right now, and I think there are actually about 8 million, not 4 million, but about 8 million people enrolled in this program expecting that their student loan payments can be cut in half, it's unlikely to happen. And so the best advice that the experts are giving, and when you think about it from a logical perspective, is that it's pretty unlikely SAVE is going to be saved. So what should you do? And that is go and find a repayment program that could work for you. And the one thing I will say, and I said this pretty consistently over the last couple of years, is the studentaid.gov site. That's the one that the Department of Education uses to give information on all these different repayment programs. And there's a ton of detail in this, Bob. So I don't really want to be too specific other than to say to your listeners, if you have a student loan outstanding and you're not making payments on them right now, and you should be, go to studentaid.gov and look to see which program would work for you. They even have a student loan simulator there. Well, let's say if you use this program, here's how much your monthly payment will be, and here are the different terms. If you use that program, same way. But I think it's pretty safe to say that if your loan hasn't yet been forgiven, it's unlikely that it's going to be forgiven. So take some action now to start getting in that habit of making the payments, because it's unlikely that you're not going to have the ability to benefit from one of these forgiveness programs going forward.
So having said all that, do you think that SAVE program will be passed?
No, I don't think so. I think what most likely will happen is that at some time after the Trump administration comes in around January 20th and they have that first flurry of activity, if they don't do anything about this student loan program that now they've inherited. So as the new administration, they're the ones who are saying we want you, the Supreme Court, to save this program. There are some who think, and I think this is a logical outcome, that the new Trump administration Department of Education, Linda McMahon, who's going to be the Secretary of Education if she's confirmed, and I think she probably will be, I think it's highly likely she'll say, we're going to withdraw this suit. We don't want this pay program. There are repayment programs in place, and students should go and use one of the programs that are in place. So again, more confusion for student loan borrowers. That's the problem.
Oh, lots of confusion. And now I'm having a little confusion. So Linda McMahon, correct me if I'm wrong, is or was CEO of World WWE?
Oh, that's right. Well, great qualifications, right?
I just thought I'd bring that up.
I didn't want to, but yeah, that's her qualification. She's involved with that, and she's going to be the Secretary of Education unless she's not confirmed. But I think most of the pundits in Washington believe she'll be confirmed. I don't think that President Trump's group that's out there on the education front right now have been proponents of any of these programs. Certainly the congressman. Remember now in the House of Representatives, we're going to have a new chair, now a Republican chair of that House Education Committee. And I saw him speak in September, and he basically said, hey, we're going to hold that Department of Education accountable. You know, they have some programs there that we don't agree with, and we're going to see what changes we can make. So I think the changes are coming, and they won't be favorable for a student loan borrower's perspective, because those forgiveness programs, I think, I'm going to say it this way, they probably have run their course for the short term here.
Well, couple of observations. Linda McMahon, just putting all kidding aside, she is an incredible businesswoman. I mean, incredible business. What she's done with WWE and the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars they make, it's incredible. So you might actually see someone come in there like President Trump and not play politics, which would be good. The other thing is that, you got to remember, talking about the shift from President Biden's administration to President Trump's administration, always be aware that this is it. He has nothing to lose. He doesn't have to make anybody happy by doing anything with student loans. And it's kind of one of those things, unfortunately, and I hate to be negative on this, but it's probably one of those things that's going to kind of get swept under the rug, and on we'll go. Because if you consider what he's trying to tackle, that's kind of a student loan debt. Sure seems like a small problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had lunch today with a friend of mine who told me he was celebrating this year is going to be his 45th year as a bond lawyer. Despite 45 years, he's still, I think, a pretty young, spry guy, and we had a really good conversation. We had exactly this conversation. And his view, which I agree with, was that this has become the ultimate bargaining chip. He said, just think about this, John. Since about 2010, we've been talking about these kind of issues. 2016, it came up in the election. And in the interim, we've had a couple of Republican administrations, we've had some Democratic, we've had others who have said, I want to tackle this program. And then at the end of the day, it doesn't get done. And he said, I think the reason it doesn't get done here is there'll probably be a tax bill. There are a lot of other fish that need to fry. And he made the point you did with the new Secretary of Education is a very good business person, extremely astute. And they're going to do a process analysis to figure out how they can make whatever the new Department of Education becomes more efficient. And that means they might want to fry some other fish. So, yes, I think from that perspective, a new day has dawned, and we'll have to see how it plays out. And it's just going to take some period of time here.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Talking to John Hupalo, we're talking about student loan debt, and if you want more information about the whole process of sending your child to college, going through the process, everything that you possibly want to know, tons of free resources, mycollegecorner.com. And if you're not going there, you're totally missing out on great information, and I know how much it's helped me with with my kids getting through college, and I know it can help you. MyCollegeCorner.com. A second shift in 2025, and it's interesting that they pointed this out because it's almost as if they're saying or implying it's a new thing, but it's really not, obviously. But they talk about that borrowers could face tax refund wages and Social Security checks garnished. Not a new practice, but is it something that, and I'm just not as familiar on the collection side, is it something that the government's always kind of had as an option for collections and they haven't really used it as much, and they're going to really start that practice up in a big way? Or is it just something that we're in a situation today that the situation calls for it?
Yeah, Bob, it's a little bit of each. So you're right. These garnishment allowances, so the government can go and carve a little bit out of my paycheck or even out of my Social Security payment if I'm receiving one, has been there for quite a long time. And by memory, I'm thinking like since the 90s when there was a real big default problem and the government needed a hammer to collect on the federal student loans. So they said, we can do this. And then some of the states even said, hey, if you're in our state and you're in default on a loan, we're not going to give you your professional license recertification. So if you're a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you need some certification, you're not going to be able to get it. So there was this big thing hanging over people's head, and it's been there for a long time. It's not new. What is new, and what's new for 2025, is that remember back in March 2020, they said, all right, we're in the pandemic. You don't have to pay on your loans. It's going to be a 6-month thing. Fast forward 3.5 years later, and student loan collections were supposed to start again in October of 2023. For a student loan to default, you have to wait 270 days. So none of this collection activity has been required for what's going to be pretty close to 5 years, right? So what happened when October 1 came, borrowers are supposed to start paying. They're now 3 months into it. Pretty soon they're going to be 6 months into it. And then in September they're going to be, or in July, rather, August, they're going to be 9 months into it. At the time, if they didn't make any of those payments, they'll have defaulted. That means the government will send the loan, and then it's going to start this whole default process. And the end of the default process can end up with a garnishment against your wage. So that's kind of lurking around out there. The reason why we haven't heard much about it is because there haven't been required payments, which means there haven't been any real defaults. But all of that is about to come to an end. And the reality of this is that borrowers are supposed to be making payments. And if they're not making payments, they're now starting to be reported again to the credit bureaus. And that's going to start that whole process that could end in a wage garnishment, either through my paycheck or my Social Security payment.
Well, and what's interesting is this speaks to a category of borrowers that I don't think I've ever really understood as being problematic. They speak to those who are getting Social Security checks. I imagine people who are retired and defaulting on their payments to the student loans. I mean, give me some examples of what that looks like, because that's a category you don't expect to see. And I've heard and read that that's really becoming a problem.
Yeah, it's becoming a problem, Bob, predominantly for parents who took out a PLUS loan for their undergraduate students. And so, the reality, as you're saying, unless, and I'll use myself as an example, I graduated, more than 30 years ago from college, and if I'm still paying on my student loan in my 60s, then something didn't go right for me because I was supposed to have paid within 10 years. And so if I'm now paying 20 or 30 years later, something happened and it wasn't good, right? So I think the number of folks in that category, meaning that they're having a garnishment against their Social Security check for their own loan, probably pretty small. Also, they can garnish, though, for any federal loan. So if I took out a parent loan for my daughter, which, by the way, I didn't because I've told you many times I don't like the PLUS loan program. But,
just a few.
But if I had and I defaulted and he came after me, they could, when my time came to collect Social Security, they could collect against that. So I'm anecdotally saying, and I haven't seen a lot of data on this, but I'm just thinking it must be those plus loan borrowers for their undergraduate students. And one of the problems I have with the plus loan is that as a parent, I take it out, and many parents, because I've heard this from even some of my friends, said to me, I'll take the plus loan and then I'll sign it over to my daughter or son when they get their financial legs on the ground. And you cannot do that, right? So it's your loan until it's paid off or you die or whatever happens. And so at the end of the day, you can't change that. So I think that's probably where those collection activities are coming. And it's not a huge number of borrowers, but it's going to affect some people. And if you're one of those, then it's a big deal.
The fourth shift this article talks about, which to me makes no sense because we haven't experienced lower interest rates after the Fed started raising them. But the lower interest rates could make refinancing tempting. Now, that's once you, and correct me if I'm wrong, once you refinance that debt to a private from a government type loan, you give up a few protections. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right, and that's what some those who say that refinancing federal loans under no circumstances makes sense. I completely disagree with that. I think that borrowers who have a mortgage, maybe have a car loan, they borrowed before, they can make that determination because the interest rate could be substantially lower. The debt amount might be less. So the trade-off, though, is that you give up all your rights, no income contingent repayments. If it's eligible for a public service loan forgiveness, you won't ever get that. So that's the big trade-off. I give borrowers, meaning those of us listening to your show, and when we're talking about this, they're pretty sophisticated when it comes to understanding that this is a lower payment amount. If I'm going to make these payments over this period of time, I'm going to be able to do that or not, and they can determine whether they need those federal benefits or not.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Of course, we don't have necessarily have time to talk about this, but it makes I picture a bunch of politicians sitting in a room coming up with the student loan program, and you got to wonder where was it a good idea to let someone borrow as much up to 110% or however much they let you go. Well, where was it a good idea to let people do that? And not, we're all responsible for our decisions, of course, but I think that the biggest problem with student loans is it's just an environment, a system that can set you up to fail.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll end where I started with the Yogi Berra quote. What it was, you observe a lot by watching. And we've observed over the years, and we've watched that the politicians are not the right folks to make federal policy around good loan programs. They want to provide access to education. They're not so worried about how you're going to pay for it on the back end. And when they try to help you pay for it, it seems like they get really boxed up really quickly. So I agree with you, Bob. It's a problem, and I hope that this new administration will take it seriously and come up with some sensible answers to real questions and real problems that your listeners and a lot of other people are having.
Well, good information, John. It's great talking to you. We will talk to you next month.
Look forward to it. Be well, Bob. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website. Until we meet again, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.